Excellent. So can you guys all see my screen? Yes? Excellent. Perfect. So I'm going to invite you to share your experiences and talk as I go through my slides. I think it's important for us to discuss and bring our own experiences with, especially in these times, and share what we have learned and what we've learned by doing, actually, because you're everybody, I guess, the whole situation in teaching everything online as opposed to face-to-face. So this is our first webinar of 2021, Seeing Learners Online. And our webinar is sponsored by ITAP, International Test of English Proficiency. So thank you, Perry, and you have the chairman here with us. So our webinar today is sponsored by International Test of English Proficiency, ITAP. So as I'm talking about today, one second. Yes, thank you, ITAP. Let's think about challenges. Let's think about strategies, opportunities, choices, best practices, and consequences. Just like we would in language learners face-to-face, right? We have challenges, we have to make choices, we have to come up with new strategies. But we also, with technology and being able to teach online, it also has afforded us with a lot of opportunities as well. So I would like also to discuss a little bit about the new opportunities that we have teaching online that we didn't used to have teaching face-to-face. Okay. Let's keep going here. So let's start with a discussion. And these two questions I sent you in an email before we started. And the first question is, how is student language learning online different from what you have done before in face-to-face contexts? So think about this whole year that we've been teaching. So in what ways your online assessment practices the same as face-to-face? So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can talk about this. How has it been different and how has it stayed the same? Would you like to share? Either way, different or the same.
I'm not teaching anymore,
but change anything? Go ahead, Annie.
I was going to say that I'm not teaching anymore, but I did teach online for quite a while before leaving the classroom, and it was the same in that I tried to maintain the same frequency of assessments in my classes as I would in a face-to-face setting, but obviously the methodology was very different.
All right, so frequency was the same and methodology was different. All right, we're going to talk about these as well. Nadia.
So for me, for teaching writing, and it's a mix between non-native speakers and native speakers, there is an ESL component there too. Not much has changed. Just like Annie was saying, I have the same frequency of exams, which is not exams, it's most like writing and essays. It was online before, like, because I'm using an online platform, so students are still submitting online. So not much has changed. I think it actually made it easier in terms of, you know, instead of collecting a chunk of essays, everything is online. It made my work easier for that perspective. But
like give feedback as well.
Right, because I can just write it in text, and I've been helping my students to learn more how to use Google Docs. So that's how we're doing peer review. So it's actually, I think it's also easier for them once they understand that step. What has been different though, if I had quizzes, now I would do them on still through the online platform, but there is that always uncertainty, whether is it really my student who's taking the quiz. So that is something that I cannot tell whether if it's timed, it's a one-time quiz, or they have multiple choice to take it. So that's why I sort the result through the writing instead of quizzes. So that's why I've been trying to eliminate those or have them as minimal. So that's the main thing that has changed or not changed.
Cheating. basically, and then plagiarism,
Right.
things related to that. So we talked about frequency, methodology, easy of giving feedback, right? And then cheating and not knowing because it's online, so you don't know if it's the person taking. So we're going to be talking about these issues as well. Abdul-Samad, anything for you in terms of what changed or stayed the same?
Yeah, so I haven't been teaching since August because I'm focusing on my research, but I did before when the pandemic hit, and this similar to the in-class assessment was again the content, the skills, but the way again it was different. I was doing online quizzes, but they were a kind of open book after class quiz, because if I'm doing them in the class, it's taking the time of the class. And usually I would have like only like 50 minutes. And then if it's a quiz, it's technology, it's taking longer and many like technical issues. But then it's after the class, okay, guys, it's open book, open your book, read, and I make the questions more comprehension rather than like copy and paste. So they really need to read. Yes. Thank you.
So the type of tasks as well, right? The type of tasks. And I think you touched on an important point there when it comes to allowing class time to be actual class time, and then leaving the assessments for outside of class time, which we wouldn't able or not able to do when we were face to face for the most part, depending on what you're doing, like doing in-class quiz or something like that. Now it had to be during class time. Now we can actually assign that for outside of class time and use up the time in class to actually teach. And so that's I think it's an opportunity that we have with teaching online that we didn't really previously have with on face-to-face, right? And so one more question before we move on. How has your time spent grading? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Nadia said it was easier to give feedback. It's faster to write it in text, receiving a paper and then actually writing it down. But overall, do you think it increased or decreased your testing, your assessment, like grading time?
I'd say that when I was teaching online, I spent about 3 times longer on grading and giving feedback than I would in a face-to-face setting.
And why is that, Annie?
It's just more laborious to enter feedback in a digital way. I eventually got to the point where I was dictating some of my feedback to make it quicker. But in general, I just felt that online students needed more support and that they needed more precise feedback. And so it was really important to me to spend the time to give that to them.
And that makes sense. And while it can be helped and faster if you have multiple choice and things like that, they are automatically graded. I agree with you that giving feedback and more specific feedback and more hand holding, I feel like sometimes you have to do that with online to keep the engagement going, that you wouldn't have to do so much or as much face to face, right? Nadia, did you want to say something?
No, I agree with what Annie said. So it's either sometimes the same or more, just because again, sometimes I can say a few words in class. Hey, your essay was, or I noticed, now I have to write it. And then there are also more email signs. So it's not just the feedback itself, it's the back and forth, negotiating what I wrote or I did not write, or setting up time during class or after class so that I can talk. So if I were in class, I would talk to 15, 20 students within the same class time, on and off. If I have to schedule it, it's going to take long, and it does. So it is more work depending on what I'm assessing.
And now let's go back to what Abdul-Samad said about types of tasks. So I asked you right now if it increased or decreased the amount of time that you spent grading. How about the time that you spent creating the assessment itself? Has it increased or has it decreased? Increased, Abdul-Samad?
Yes, it increased because firstly, I needed to make sure the questions really need the reading. So it's not just copy and paste, because in this way, I'm not helping them to learn. But also for me is to put the questions into the system, D2L, and making sure the questions are working, making sure the matchings are correct, and I preview the test. I take the test myself first time, and then so it's also like the technical skills that I need to make sure they're working for myself before I just post and make the quiz available for the student. Whereas when it was in class, I have the screen in front of me. I can print it out, just make the correction, the revisions, the editing, and then change that in the screen, print it out, and go to the class.
Make copies and then go to class, right? And then just come back and then grade everything manually, right? So yes, assessing online has brought, I think, a lot of challenges for us and increased our time in many ways, and not only for assessment. I think preparing lesson plans also for teaching online for me takes a lot longer than just preparing to go and teach, right, in face-to-face. So I think while yes, online assessment and teaching, we have a lot of opportunities to do different things that we, especially with the social aspect of it, in terms of language use. There are a lot of things that we can do with our students, but at the same time, it takes more prep time. And then like you're saying, like the technical difficulties that we may have. And so we have to, I think we have to a lot of times like keep thinking, keep focused on the good things about it and the opportunities that we have with the new technologies, as opposed to, okay, how much time is going to take for us to do something that it was to be very fast and quickly and efficient, and now it takes a lot more time. Excellent. So let's keep going here. So it is different in a lot of ways, but it's also same in a lot of ways. And I want to focus a little bit also on the fact that in what ways it's the same, right? All right. In one way, it is the same, is that we need to craft an assessment strategy that informs our teaching, right? Either online or face-to-face, that fosters learning, either online or face-to-face, and provides ample opportunity for accurate measurement of student learning. We need to know that if they're learning what we think, if they're able to do the things that we expect them to be able to do by the end of the course, right? And it's the same, face-to-face or online. And we do not want our assessments to be just like a jump through the hoop, right? And I feel like it has happened a lot, especially with moving to online and people not even thinking about grades anymore, right? With the whole pandemic situation going on. But we shouldn't think of assessments as, oh, I just have to get it done, right? This is a hassle, or this needs done so that I can move on. We should keep thinking of assessments as learning tools, right? To enhance the learning experience, right? Growth and learning can happen, and it's just not just, okay, let me just see if, let me take this quiz just so we can get through this. And we should use our assessments as learning opportunities as well, more than ever, I would say, even more so than what we have in face-to-face environments. Because the end goal of better assessment is better learning. So rather than forgetting about assessment because we have so many things else to consider teaching online, and there is a pandemic going on, there are other riots going on, or whatever it is going on in our lives, right? We should not ignore assessment in online courses. And that's something that I follow a lot of higher ed groups. And a lot of people will say, oh, I'm just like pass or fail, or not thinking about assessment because assessment should not be the priority. And I disagree. I think assessment should be the priority, because with the good assessment, we have good learning, right? We're using assessment tools to improve learning, to improve our teaching. So we should definitely not ignore that when we are teaching online. Okay. So effective online assessment. How can we design effective assessments in online learning in our environment, right? So the first thing we have to do is ask ourselves, and the questions that I'm going to have here are questions that we have to ask ourselves no matter what, face-to-face or online. Why do I need to assess? When and how often do I need to assess? You guys mentioned frequency before, right? So are you keeping the same frequency? Are you changing? But if you are changing, why are you changing, right? What do you need to assess, right? What information you need to know about your students' ability to make your decisions and move forward, and how you are going to assess your students, right? What performance from them will give me the information and how will I get it? And of course, and I think this is the part that with online teaching, we need to be thinking outside of the box, because what used to be okay for face-to-face, what we used to work in face-to-face situations, it doesn't really apply all the time to online environments. So I think the how is where we spend most of our time, not only in what type of tools we're going to use, but also, like Abdul Samad said, the types of tasks we are requiring them to do. Because tying that to what Nadia said, is the student actually taking my quiz? Is the actual student? So how do I know that? So I think the technical, the tools, right? The content of your tasks, the type of tasks, these are things that we have to spend a lot more time thinking about when we are testing online.
Question.
Terry, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, do you recommend that baselines be established from the very beginning? So all students learn at different rates of speed. We know that. And I would think that assessment at the very beginning of a course would be just as important as one halfway through. Certainly, I wouldn't wait till the very end to assess because then it's too late. But I'm just wondering, I'd like for someone to speak to pre and interim assessment if someone has had that experience.
So are you talking about in terms of like how many assessments, what to do when?
Well, when I get a group of students, or when I used to teach, get a group of students. So the students are tested on day one on the learning objectives of the class, and then they would be tested or should be tested halfway through and at the end. But unless you have a baseline, you don't know where you started. So how do you develop the baseline for assessment purposes, if that makes sense? It makes sense to me, of course.
Yes, we're actually going to go back to it because we're actually going to go back to this because we're going to be talking about frequency of assessment and small assessments as well, as we go, and I have an example here that maybe it will be able to answer your question. Definitely. So other things to ask yourself just face to face: what learning does each task measure, right? Are you going to teach everything you measure, including are you going to teach them how to use the tool that you're deciding to use, right? What will quality work look like on this task? And especially with online tools, you have to be careful and you have to think to yourself, what if my student cannot produce a video, or somebody produces a really well-made video because they know how to make videos, they are tech savvy, but you have somebody else who may not be. So is that going to, what is quality work in terms of the language production, and what is that going to look like for this particular task that you're giving? And do not let somebody who's like super tech savvy and can make wonderful edited videos with special effects and somebody who is not, what are you going to be looking at? So we have to be very careful with that. Again, and this ties to what I just said, how much of the grade depends on outside resources, and the fact that not all of our students either have reliable internet connection or they have access to the same tools. Can all of them do well on the task, regardless of how they learn best, or regardless of the tools that they have at their disposal and their tech literacy, right? Will their technology literacy affect their result, right? So we have to be thinking about that, because we're looking at the learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes should be tied to the language learning outcomes, right? Language performance. What do you want your students to be able to do with the language? And so how are other aspects outside aspects going to affect your grade? This is something that we need to really consider. And could this assignment be called practice instead? Instead of grading it, can it just be practice as opposed to I have to give a grade to every single thing? And that also diminishes your workload too, in terms of, oh, do I really have to assign a grade to every little thing? Or can this just be practice for you and for the students as well? Okay. And then, of course, we have our key assessment principles that should also apply to online assessment. So this is something that should stay the same, right? You should aim for valid assessments. You should aim for reliable assessments, practical assessments, right? Not only in terms of administering the test itself, but also on you later to grade the assessment, right? Is it providing information that is useful to the learner, right? Does it have positive effects on learning and teaching? And is it authentic, right? Is it real world language use? Are the students being asked to perform real world tasks, right? So those key principles apply to the classroom face-to-face, and they should also definitely apply to online assessments. So this should stay the same. You asking yourself those questions, whether your assessments are valid, reliable, practical. They provide useful information to the learner and the teacher, and whether they are authentic, right? So these things should be in your mind no matter what. So let's talk a little bit more about effective online assessment. It has to contribute to the learning process, real world demonstration, application, or performance. And this is going to tie back to what Abdul Samad said in terms of the tasks. So the tasks that we are asking them to do, I think with an online environment, we have to strive and we have to try to achieve as much as we can with real world. And this is one opportunity that the technologies afford us that sometimes we don't have in the classroom face-to-face, right? Just like face-to-face, it has to be relevant and aligned to the student outcomes and the learning community, right? And their goals. And it also affects, for example, what kind of assessments you're doing, how much you trust your students, depending on the environment, what their goals are, right? So for example, program, Cecil, and we didn't really have a platform that all the students would be able to access and take the quizzes online, like D2L. They didn't have access to that. And so I would send them the quizzes and have them take the quizzes and send them back to me. It took forever to like download each quiz and then manually give feedback on each one of them. But I had personal questions there. I was teaching an advanced grammar class, and nobody cheated in terms of like they had the same answer because I was asking personal questions to them to use the grammar that we were learning. And so they were answering me, like they were giving me all these different answers, and they were trying different things as well. So it has to be aligned to the outcomes, but it also has to be relevant to who your students are and what they need to do, right? And need to learn to do. Transparency, right? You need clearly communicated goals and requirements, and continuous interaction between instructor and students and among students themselves, right? And then this ties back to the frequency. So let's talk a little bit about that. So a lot of research that has talked about online assessment in general, not only for language learning, talks about the importance of frequent small assessments to target a few different things that are very common in the online environment. First, of course, and this is also like face-to-face, that's not very different. It lets students know how they're doing the course, right? It provides room for improvement or adjustment. This is exactly the same. That's the reason why we don't have only one final assessment face-to-face or online. So for example, here, and Perry, maybe this will answer a little bit of your question. So for example, we require the student to access the course 2 or 3 times a week, depending on how many times you're teaching them as well, or if you want them to have more contact with the course that we are able to do online as well. Even if we only teach like 1-2 hour class, for example, or we see students twice a week only. So for example, on Wednesday, you give a short objective quiz on the assigned reading material. Let's say it's a reading class, right? On Friday, it's something a little bit more personal. You have them summarize the reading, and then they have to post a reflection of what was learned through the assignment on the discussion board, right? Or of what they learned through doing their reading, right? And then on Sunday, they reply to a fellow student's reflection. And you can grade all of these steps if you want, right? You can grade the quiz, which is objective, right? It's just checking, but that quiz grade should be lower, because if it's an objective quiz, chances are they can cheat easier, right? And so put it there to help. Hopefully they are not going to cheat. You're going to try to create questions that will help them engage with the reading. And so the quiz itself will help them understand the reading better, right? So that would be the quiz on Wednesday. And then on Friday, they have to actually engage with the material. And that's how you change the task, right? You have them to write a summary, or you have them write, for example, 3 questions that they had when they were reading the text, right? Or when we're engaging with the material. And then they have to post a reflection on the discussion board, and then they have to post the reflection, or they have to post a response to a student's reflection. So you're engaging the students, and you could also, like I said, be assigning grades to every step, or you can just choose the Friday, for example, step and give the grade there, right? But you see like how they built on each other, each assessment, right? And then you have this ongoing assessment, right, going on, because with ongoing assessment, you give ongoing feedback to the students. And not only like by you actually writing down feedback, but they can also see, oh, I got 3 out of 5 in this quiz, right? So it's giving feedback to them as well. Or I got 5 out of 5, or I'm doing really well. You wrote a feedback for the student, and it increases motivation and increases the student engagement and achievement. So assessment is an integral part of the process, right? So we should not ignore it just because we are teaching online and we are just assuming the worst, that people are going to cheat. I don't think that that's the way to go with assessment, right? It should be there. It should be a critical component of teaching and learning, right? Because I see those people, way too many people advocating for ignoring assessment, or for just, oh, it's just tests. Why do we need tests? We need tests. But good tests, good assessment tools, right? To inform our teaching and to inform learning. Now let's talk a little bit about plagiarism and cheating. But before we do that, can you guys share with me? Hi, Gabriel. I just saw that you joined. So can you talk to me about some of the issues that you have experienced with cheating and plagiarism in your classes since we've moved online? Have those increased? Are you more worried about it? Talk to me a little bit about your feelings as well.
I think that cheating was pretty rampant in my online classes, and it sometimes seems that there wasn't much that could actually be done about it. But for some of the higher stakes assessments, we did end up implementing a remote proctoring tool, a computer proctoring tool, to at least be able to, for those types of assessments, guarantee that it was the actual student that was taking the assessment. But whenever it was any kind of production type assignment, there were often lots of signs of cheating and plagiarism, and I had to be very vigilant about that and reported much more frequently issues with academic honesty than I ever had in a face-to-face classroom.
Anybody has experienced the same thing? Gabriel, Nadia, and Perry?
Yeah, same thing here. I do believe that cases of plagiarism and cheating increased. I was just in a meeting talking about that actually. For example, last semester, our school teaches the 4 abilities, and for the writing test, for example, I had a student who probably went on Google Translate and typed in her text, and then when she copied and pasted the text, she copied the Portuguese version instead of she forgot, she just slipped, and she never mentioned anything. So We do see cases like this, and we're still struggling to find out the best procedures to avoid that. But we have thought about using a software like, I don't know who was talking, like she's in, like she said, but we haven't made any decision yet about that.
I can tell you with testing around the world, students are typically a step ahead of those who are providing the tests. And so you have to run very fast to keep up with the students if you want to find a test that students cannot cheat on. So it's just it's a running battle, and you don't want to believe that there's so many bad people in the world. So I don't consider cheaters bad. I just consider us not good enough. If we send out a test that they can cheat on, then we have to accept responsibility for that. No, not the students. At least that's my approach.
I definitely agree, and I think we can, and that's where we have to think outside the box with online assessments, because we have to try to minimize as much as possible the chances that they're going to be cheating, right? But we have to accept the fact too that they will try, like some students will try, as they would try face-to-face as well, except that with online, you have the whole, like, I don't know if your institutions require a camera on, if you can actually record the student taking the test, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some tips and some suggestions, but please feel free to jump in and talk as well. So let me go ahead and share here again. So, and this ties back to what ELTSociety said with the types of tasks, right? So limit the use of objective assessments such as multiple choice tests, and assess more higher order critical thinking skills when you are assessing students. And so asking, for example, students to summarize the content and engage with it in a personal way, analyzing, asking questions, reflecting. And one way to do that I think it helped me a lot was to think of Bloom's taxonomy, right? And so using those columns and those different skills to actually help me create my assessments. So thinking about the verbs that we have for each type of skill helped me create questions better. So thinking about different verbs and thinking about of different tasks that students could do. So it helped me a whole lot. And that's why one of the reasons why I shared this website with you prior to this is because I think this was one of the best things there, is that it helped me create better tasks if I keep thinking about those verbs and those different, the scale of knowledge, the spectrum, right? And so it helped me create more personal and tasks that were harder to cheat on. And if they were going to copy off of each other, or if they were going to try to find online, right? So coming up with my own tasks and using those as my basis actually helped a lot. So I hope that that also helps you create better questions, right? Come up with ideas to create better questions to ask our students. The ways here that we have is, like I said, in my previous example, on Wednesday, you do a short quiz, right? Multiple choice quiz. Don't get completely, right? These are important as well, but in a way that you can use that as to help them build up the knowledge that they will need to demonstrate in a bigger task later. So still use multiple choice tests, yes, but make them either don't grade them or make it like a lower, that they will have a lower impact on the grade just in case the student cheats, but that they will help students see that taking this quiz will help them later, right? So help engage the assessments, right? And if you use objective assessments, assume that your students will use their books and discuss the concepts with friends, not even maybe discuss, just text each other the answers, right? And write your questions accordingly. So if you keep that in mind, when you're writing a multiple choice quiz, don't just take that from the actual material that they were had, like rewrite it, reword it, right? Think that they're gonna use it in the first place, which was an assumption that we didn't have when we're teaching face-to-face, because, well, it's not open book. So I think the mindset of, okay, I'm going to create a quiz for a student who has access to my PowerPoint, or for a student who has access to the reading material. How can I create a question that is a better question to test this, knowing that they're going to have access to this? Right? And also know and be prepared that they're going to talk to each other. And it happened to me. So I created on D2L a quiz, and of course, there's ways that you can do. I had the same question for everybody, same questions, but then I asked D2L to change the order of I forgot the word, the distractors of A, B, C, and D. So what was A for one was B for the other, right? C. And I actually had a student email me afterwards, like my friend got an 85% and I got a 60, and we had the same answers. And I was like, well, you did not have, you had the same letters for the options, but you did not have the same answers because you did not see the exact same structure, right? They saw the same order of questions, but not the distractors. And so I keep thinking if I should have said that or not, but it was kind of like like pay attention to this. But sometimes they don't even realize that. And so you can clearly tell, right? Again, just like with face-to-face, it's best practice to use a variety of assessments to address multiple learning styles, right? To address any other things that could happen in the way. So a variety of assessments is always good. And this is, I think, is the most important part. And that's what helped me a lot. Using frequent assessments helps you get to know your student, right? So you know what your student's work looks like, and it makes the identification of dishonest work easier too. So if you have them writing discussion boards or writing even the practice assessments, right, that you're actually grading, it helps you get to know them better. So those frequent assessments helps you later with identifying plagiarism and cheating, right? If you have a student who could barely write a discussion post, and then they produce at the end, like Gabriel was saying, like a perfect text because the Google Translate is so good nowadays, right? And then you say, okay, you can catch it easier if you have that knowledge about the student, right? Which in many ways is much easier face-to-face to get to know the students. And so by having them produce all these things, graded or not graded, online, then you get to know them as well and the quality of their work, right? Oops, sorry. So let's talk a little bit about opportunities here. Like I said, with the focusing on good things, right? With the development of technology, you have more opportunities for rich content and interaction, more authentic language use and communicative learning tasks, and helping language learners achieve fluency in communication, which is something that sometimes we are very bound inside the classroom, which we're not as much online, right? There's so many resources out there and so many tools that have students interact and engage with each other that we can also use for assessment, right? Like I said, they enable direct communication between users, allow users to interact and collaborate. You have a synchronous communication and can be done outside of class time, so you're not wasting class time. And then synchronous communication, right, when you're teaching online via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams or whatever, that you can also use that time to do, like get students in breakout rooms and do oral assessment, ask them questions, right, or do an interview. And it's authentic language use practice, right? Which I think sometimes in the classroom we just do practice for practice sake. Then with some of these tools, we're able to have a lot more authentic language use, right? Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to actually talk a lot about different tools that can be used, because I think that's another webinar in itself. Different tools that can be used for assessment, right? Today we're talking about basically about best practices in online assessment as opposed to actually the tools themselves. But that's something to consider for an upcoming webinar. How to use those tools for assessment as well. And if you're using them for classroom activities and students are familiar with them, they could definitely be transferred and be used for assessment as well. A couple of considerations and tips. Decide beforehand how much issues like late work, bad formatting, like I talked a little bit about this before, right, are going to affect a student's grade, right? since those aspects are not an actual demonstration of students' language ability, which is our focus on our learning outcomes, right? And because of the pandemic, the state of the world right now, one thing that I've heard a lot from teachers is the life happens ticket, right? So, for example, you can have a late work policy that won't apply to one assignment, and the student can choose which assignment it is, and they let you know. And this life happens ticket could take as whatever form as you wish, right? Maybe you don't count one quiz grade, or maybe you decide that that, or the student can decide which assignment they're not going to submit, or an assignment that they can submit late but it won't affect their grade. Also think about how much lateness actually affects their grade, because lateness, you can have a student who will submit a perfect assignment, but it was 2 days late, and you take like 20% off their grade, so it's not a representation of what they can actually do with the language. So we have to think very carefully about how issues like late work and formatting and technical issues will affect their grade, right? And now this is a part that I actually want to hear from you too. What do you, these bullet points were in the blog that I shared, and I wanted to hear from you what you think about those tips, right? About testing competency, not memory. Assessment shouldn't be about what people know, it's what they can do. Make sure that your assessments help your students develop a sense of confidence, right? So assessment as an integral part of the course. And then this is the part, that's the one that I was reading. I was like, I want to hear what they have to say about this one. Let learners do it whenever they want to. Like, for example, you say you have until next Sunday to complete this assessment, right? Or open the assessment for them to do even before you talk about the material. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this one specifically. And of course, final assessment. Do you want it to cover all of the learning outcomes included in the course? So let's talk a little bit about this and other thoughts that you may have regarding what I talked about. So let's start with the third bullet point, because that's the one that I'm most interested in. What do you think about this ability that we have online to just let students do the assessment at whatever time works best for them? What do you think about that? Pros and cons.
Tony, which one was that on the list again? I don't see you've taken the list off the screen.
I did, the third one. Here, there you go. There it is again, number 3. Let learners do it whenever they want to. And that could mean they have until Sunday to do it, or it could mean they could do it before, even if they wanted to test out if they know the topic, even before you teach about the topic. What do you think about this?
So when you say they can test out, I know what the words mean, but what do you mean by that? If learners may have prior learning on a topic, they don't attend that class, or
that's I think a bit controversial, and that's what I want to hear from you. So I think I read this bullet point as 2 things. One, like you open the quiz and they can take quiz whenever they want. It doesn't have to be during class time. It could be after class. It could be at 3, right? Because previously in face-to-face environments, you have to give the test at the same time, right? But then when you do open, and I can take a one time, Perry, you take it another time, and then Gabrielle takes it another time. We talk, I took it first, and I can talk to you. So what are,
I think,
or by allowing the students to take the test?
Yeah, personally, if the students,
Go ahead.
If the students know the material, no reason to make them sit through it again. So the question is, how accurately can you develop tests that will result in students being able to test out? I mean, that you've really tested the knowledge. And, you know, with language just makes up so many different skills. I don't know how you would test out of one of them. So.
Yeah, no, I don't either. This was not specifically about language, apply to us as well or not, right?
I would call it test your knowledge instead of test out. Like,
Well, that's what I was suggesting, that at the
yeah,
beginning of the class, I'm assuming you develop baselines for all your students. You know what they know and don't know because of an assessment that you provided the students. So there may be a period, I don't know how long of a class we're talking about. If you're talking about a semester class, you know, you usually for ESL students, it's not a semester class, but maybe it is. But if they test out a particular area at the very beginning through a quality assessment instrument, then let's say next week you're going to be teaching that particular area. No reason for them to come to class. They already know it. But
so like a diagnostic test in the beginning,
it's
right?
to assess.
Yeah. But how about instead of, let's forget about the test out part. Let's think about giving students the time to take the test whenever they want. What do you think about that? Like they can log in and once they open, they have to finish, but they can do it at whatever time works best for them. Is this a good thing?
well, I think that might decrease anxiety on students' part and actually get ready for the test. Now, I wonder if that may diminish the incentive for cheating, because if I know that I have time to review everything, you know, typical, you walk into class, there's a quiz, and the students are reading in the book, and they tell you, teacher, 5 more minutes, I want to read this. And you, like, close your book, we get started. So maybe if you have enough time, I wonder if that could be a positive thing for them and then positive for you in return, because you know they will study for the time they need it. Now, of course, that doesn't exclude cheating. That can always happen. But I would say I would feel more relaxed if I know that I have between today and next Monday to do something. But for that, I would talk about time management, procrastination, and how to, you know, handle different courses. Because I know, honestly, I just talked about it today. There are students who do things at the last minute. So you could give them a month. They would take it on the 29th day, you know? So I think it depends on how you propose it to them.
Definitely, I agree. And I also think that if you have a variety of ways to assess as well, in terms of how you do it, right? So for some assignments, they can have as much time, you can do it between today and next week, right? You can also do synchronous quizzes in class, right? And have them do the quizzes at the same time so they cannot talk to each other. Like I take the quiz first, and then Nadia takes it later, and then I talk to her what was on the quiz, right? You can do both. So I think that also helps with getting accurate results. Excellent. We don't have a lot of time left. Actually, it's already what has worked and what worked. So that is the last thing, and then I'm going to finish.
Tony, just
Harry?
Yeah, one question. Many of us have our experience in teaching ESL or EFL has been in classes of students made up of a variety of language backgrounds. And now you got a big mess on your hands. I mean, a big challenge on your hands. So if you're in, like Gabriel in Brazil, you know, they're all Portuguese speakers. He knows exactly what their problems are, what their issues are. He knows what their language learning experience is. But when you're teaching adults ESL, when I say adults, I mean students from a variety of language backgrounds, it's a much different ball game. And I don't know that we take that into account when we study or learn to be ESL, EFL teachers.
And I think online different language learning, different language backgrounds, but also technical ability, like are they tech savvy, how tech savvy they are, you know, like do they know how to use the tools that I'm going to have them do, right, as a group, and are you going to have to spend the time teaching to use the tool, and then you have to make sure that if you're giving an assessment with that particular tool that everybody's familiar, because then you don't want to increase anxiety because they're afraid that they're not going to have the internet connection to do so, or they don't know how to use the tool, right?
You know, Tanya, I can tell you that just adults, college level students, Saudi Arabians who came to the United States or come to the United States much prefer to take the IELTS test as opposed to the TOEFL test. Why? Because they make better scores on IELTS. Why? Because it's a personal, they have a personal exchange as part of the test. You have a teacher sitting there, great. So the Saudi students, so if you look at Saudi students who come, I'm talking about the ones who come to the States, and taking IELTS and TOEFL, you'll find they always make a better score on IELTS than they do on TOEFL. They'll have a better chance of getting admitted to the college with an IELTS test.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be that way, but it just is that way.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have to have a variety of assessments, right? Of different types of tests that we're asking them to do, because the Saudis will do better on the IELTS, but maybe we have another other groups of students from other language backgrounds that are not so comfortable with the types of tasks, like personal tasks. So we have to make sure that we are addressing and helping all students equally, as opposed to favoring one group of students, right? So we have to think about that when we create our tasks and the tools that we are using, and we're going to ask them to use as well, right? And so let me wrap it up here. So any other suggestions or things that have worked for you, or something that really did not work for you that you would like to share with us? Any other issues? Because I think we talked about like a lot of like plagiarism, we talked about cheating, we talked about frequency of assessments, we talked about types of tasks, right? We have to keep in mind all those things. And while I think it does take a lot of time for us to prepare better assessments, more reliable assessments online, we should not let that keep us from using assessment in online courses. I think that's the most important thing, because it's completely ignoring assessments as a part of learning, as a part of teaching, just because we are in an online environment and, oh, the students are going to cheat anyway. No, there are ways that we can, there are steps that we can take. Measurement can help minimize the cheating opportunities, and it can also teach students to realize the importance of what they're doing and of the assessment to their own learning. You can provide feedback to them. And so I think one of the also, I think it's very important for online courses, is self-assessment. Engage students in self-assessment, not for a grade, but to assess themselves and say, okay, I'm learning, I'm not learning, what I need to do best, what I don't need to do. Do I know this already? Do I need more resources, right? I think it's important to help them who are. I would.
Yeah, I would really agree with you on. Of course, I agree with you on everything because I don't know enough to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
But the frequency of testing is so important, and it's the same if you're a manager. It's frequently assessing those that you're managing, and not waiting until the end of the year or an end of the semester to tell a person they're not performing. So frequency is so important, and I'm glad that you emphasized that. I like that.
Yeah. To get to know the students too, and you get to know their work, because they're not gonna cheat. They're not gonna cheat in every single assignment. So you get to know them, and by emphasize like, oh, that maybe these are just practice. These are not. So there's low stakes, right? And then you encourage them to actually produce their own work, and then you can get to know them. You get to know how they work, and you can teach them better. And if they know that, okay, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at this, and I want to see what you don't know how to do, so I can teach you and you get better. I think that's always a good approach with the students. Like I'm actually looking at your writing, and if you write something beautiful and amazing with no errors, then I don't know what you don't know. And if I don't know what you don't know, then I cannot teach you, right? So that's one thing that I always communicate to my students. I need to know what you don't know. So please make mistakes. I give them a lot of exercises, practice, not tests. I encourage them to actually make mistakes and try different things with the language so that I know what they don't know. And when you emphasize that, I think it also helps with the cheating part as well, because if they're cheating, then I don't know what you don't know, so I don't know what to teach you, right? And so I think that helps. That approach usually helps. So I'm going to end here. Thank you very much for joining me today. Also, thank you to ITEP for sponsoring our first workshop of the year. And I'm really excited for our next one as well. It will be on assessing grammar. I see that a lot of you have already signed up already to join me for next time. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope I was able to share a little bit of my knowledge with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tani.
Thank
See you
you.
next time.
Bye, everybody.